The sky over Seoul was a pale, washed-out blue. It was a Tuesday. In his small apartment, Kim Ji-hun was making breakfast for his daughter, Mina. The smell of toast and eggs filled the kitchen. On the small television in the corner, a news reporter spoke about a quiet day in global markets. It was boring. It was normal. Ji-hun liked normal. He was an engineer, a man who fixed problems with wires and code. He liked when things worked as they should. He was lifting Mina into her chair when the light changed. The soft morning sun vanished. A new light, a bright and steady silver glow, replaced it. It did not flicker. It was not a natural light. It came from everywhere at once, filling the apartment, the street, the entire city. The news report on the television dissolved into static, and then a shape formed. It was not a human shape. It was a form of shifting, shimmering light, like water made from stars. It had no clear face, but you felt it was looking at you. At everyone. A voice spoke. It was not loud, but it was inside Ji-hun's head and in the air around him. It was calm and clear, like a mountain lake. It spoke in perfect Korean, but he knew, somehow, that everyone on Earth heard it in their own language. People of Earth, the voice said. It belonged to the being of light who called itself Eller, emissary of the Galactic Conclave. Your world has been observed. Mina stopped trying to grab her spoon. Her big eyes were wide, looking at the light on the ceiling. Ji-hun's hand tightened on her chair. His heart was a hard drum in his chest. Your species exhibits a unique volatility, Eller continued. His tone was not angry. It was the tone of a doctor stating a fact. Your history is one of conflict, expansion, and unpredictable creativity. This presents a statistical risk to the harmony of the Galactic Conclave. A risk we can no longer tolerate. On the television screen, images flashed. They were not from news cameras. They showed human wars, rocket launches, cities growing like fungus, and then scenes of human art, music, and people helping each other after disasters. The good and the bad, all mixed together. You are a young, loud noise in a quiet universe, Eller said. To ensure peace, and for your own protection, the conclave requires your compliance. The words hung in the silver-lit air. Ji-hun felt cold. This was not an invasion from a movie. There were no giant ships blasting cities. This was worse. It was a form being filled out by a cosmic bureaucrat. You have 100 of your hours, Eller announced. At the end of this compliance window, the conclave will deploy a pacification fleet. You will accept the installation of governance nodes in your major population centers. These nodes will emit fields that will gently guide your collective behavior toward harmony. Your aggressive impulses will be muted. Your chaotic social structures will be organized. You will become a protected client species, and you will know lasting peace. Ji-hun's breath caught. Muted. Organized. They were such clean, simple words. They meant being turned off. They meant his daughter would never feel a sudden, wild joy. She would never get so angry she fought for something right. She would just be peaceful. A quiet part of a quiet galaxy. This is not a negotiation, Eller stated, the finality in its voice as solid as stone. It is the logical conclusion for a species at your developmental stage. Submit and be welcomed into order. Resist and be pacified. The silver light began to fade. The shimmering form on every screen and in the sky dissolved. The ordinary blue of the Tuesday sky returned. The news reporter was gone, replaced by frantic anchors trying to speak, their faces pale with terror. In his quiet kitchen, the smell of cold eggs in the air, Ji-hun picked Mina up. She buried her face in his neck. He held her, looking out the window at the suddenly fragile-looking city. The panic was starting. He could hear car horns, shouts from the street below. Sirens began to wail in the distance. But Ji-hun did not feel the sharp bite of panic. He felt a different feeling, an old and cold one settling in his stomach. It was frustration, a deep, weary frustration. He had felt this before. It was the feeling from years ago, when a strange illness was spreading and no one would say where. Official reports were calm and empty. People were scared and in the dark. He remembered refreshing web pages, looking for real information, finding only silence from the places that were supposed to know, that were supposed to protect. He remembered the moment when ordinary people, parents and shopkeepers and students, started sharing what they knew online, building their own map of the truth. That was not chaos. That was people connecting. That was how they saved themselves. This was the same. The Galactic Conclave was just a bigger, shinier version of that silent official room. They looked at humanity and saw a messy, dangerous problem. They did not see the system that the messiness built. They did not see that the fight and the love came from the same place. He walked to the balcony, Mina in his arms. People were running in the streets. Some were crying. Some were just staring at the sky. A world was ending. The world of choice. His phone buzzed. It was a message from Park Soo-min, an old friend who managed complex supply networks. The message was short. They want to turn off the noise. But the noise is the signal. Remember MERS? My place. 1 hour. Ji-hun looked down at his daughter, who was now looking at the birds returning to a tree, already forgetting the strange light. He thought of Eller's serene, logical voice. He thought of pacification fields. He thought of the maps regular people made during the outbreak, maps that finally forced the truth into the open. He typed a one-word reply. Yes. The fear was there, but it was wrapped in that stubborn, cold frustration. They were being given a form to fill out. But humanity's answer was never on the form. It was in the margins. It was in the connections between the lines. And someone had to start writing it. The world's leaders were talking. In secure bunkers and emergency video calls, presidents and generals argued. Their voices were loud with fear and pride. Some shouted for defiance. Some whispered that surrender was the only way to survive. Their debates went in circles, like birds trapped in a glass dome. They were trying to answer a question from the stars with old ideas. The clock was ticking. Far from those rooms, in a different kind of shelter, a meeting was starting. It was in a nondescript building in Seoul, behind a door that looked like it led to a server room. The air was cool and hummed with the sound of computers. This was the heart of a small internet company that had gone out of business. Park Soo-min had kept the keys. Kim Ji-hun arrived, holding a sleeping Mina in a carrier on his chest. He saw faces he knew. There was Soo-min herself, her hair tied back, looking at a large screen with a network map. She was a logistics expert. She understood how to make things move in a broken system. Lee Hannah was there, a data analyst who always saw the story the numbers were telling. She was drinking cold coffee, her eyes sharp behind her glasses, and there was Choi Tae-suk, a man who moved with a quiet heaviness. He was older, a retired artillery officer. He did not say much, but he watched everything. He understood force and the cost of using it. Others came in. A doctor named June, a young programmer named Dae, a teacher named Meekyung. They were not soldiers or politicians. They were people who fixed things, who moved things, who understood systems. They were the people who kept the world running on a normal Tuesday. Soo-min did not make a big speech. They gave us 100 hours, she said. Our governments are deciding if we should kneel. We are here to decide what we can do. Lee Hannah spoke next. Her voice was clear. The conclave sees us as a problem, a chaotic problem. They want to delete the chaos. But during the MERS outbreak, what saved people? It wasn't the first official reports. It was chaos. She put an image on the screen. It was an old digital map from years ago, covered in red dots and yellow lines. When the government was silent, people made this. They shared where they had been. They connected the dots themselves. It was messy. It was chaotic. And it forced a real response. That chaos was the solution. Ji-hun nodded, gently rocking Mina. That's what they don't see. They look at our fights and our art and see two different things. They don't see it's the same engine. So what is our move? Asked Tae-suk, his voice a low rumble. We cannot fight a pacification fleet with old missiles. We don't fight them, Hannah said. We talk to them. We send them our case. Not from our governments. From us. We show them what humanity really is. The whole picture. Soo-min brought up a new image. It was a global network diagram. We build a system to collect it. Stories, data, art, science. Everything that shows our will to live, to connect, to push forward. We call it humanity's case. We send it to them in a way they cannot ignore. And if they ignore it anyway? Taesuk asked. He was not being difficult. He was being practical. They called us a loud noise. They might just delete our message like a bad file. A heavy silence filled the humming room. They all knew he was right. The being Eller did not sound cruel. It sounded certain. You cannot argue with certainty. Ji-hun looked down at his daughter's sleeping face. He thought about the ultimatum. It was a demand for submission. It was a parent silencing a child forever for being too loud. Then, Ji-hun said slowly, "We have to speak a language they will understand. A simpler language." He looked at Taesuk. "We have to show them what a unified human will looks like. Not with words." Taesuk met his gaze. The old soldier understood. A demonstration, not of attack, but of unity, of coordination. "Exactly," Ji-hun said. "They think our chaos means we cannot act as one without their control. We must prove that wrong, in a way that makes them pause." The group began to work. They did not have an army, but they had something else. They had a network of people who knew how to do things. Hannah and Day began designing the data packet, the collection system. It would use hidden parts of the internet, repurpose satellites, and millions of phones. They called it the Ghost Net. Sumin started planning the logistics, how to move the data, how to keep it safe, how to connect with other groups around the world who were thinking the same way. She knew there would be others. Ordinary people who felt that cold frustration. Taesuk and Ji-hun talked quietly in a corner. "A show of force that is not force," Taesuk mumbled, sketching on a notepad. "We cannot hurt their fleet. We would fail and it would prove we are violent. But we must fill the sky with a message." He drew a simple pattern. Lines crossing. A grid. "When I was in the army, the most impressive thing was not a single big missile. It was 100 small rockets firing at once. It showed perfect control. Perfect coordination." Ji-hun understood. "We show them we can coordinate. Globally. Not to attack but just to be seen. We use what we have that cannot hurt them." "Training missiles," Taesuk said. "Old rockets from museums. Satellite launch vehicles. Things with no warheads. We light up the sky with harmless fire. A salute. Or a warning." The plan was insane. It was desperate. But as the night went on, and more people connected to their ghost net, it began to feel possible. They were not a government. They were a signal, growing in the silence. That as Ji-hun prepared to leave, Mina woke up and began to cry. He soothed her, walking past the glowing screens. Hannah looked up from her work. "We are doing this for her, you know?" she said softly. Ji-hun nodded. "I know. We are not fighting to win a war. We are fighting so she still gets to be loud. So she still gets to be messy. So she still gets to choose." He stepped out of the cool, humming room and into the warm night air. The city was quieter than it should be, holding its breath. The official debates were still going on in their bunkers, talking about surrender or last stands. But down here in the streets, a different plan was being born. It was not a plan for victory. It was a plan to be seen, truly seen for the first time. They would send a letter to the stars. And if the stars did not read it, they would set off the loudest, brightest, most harmless fireworks the galaxy had ever seen. The world spent its first night under the ultimatum in a state of suspended fear. Official statements were vague, promising decisive action soon. On the streets, some people prayed. Some rioted. Most just stayed inside, watching the news, waiting for someone to tell them what would happen. The clock in the sky, counting down 100 hours, was felt by everyone. But in a few quiet places, a different kind of work continued. In the Seoul server room, the lights never went off. Park Soo-min had divided the world into a grid. Not by countries, but by networks, communication hubs, satellite ground stations, even undersea cable landing points. Her screen was a spiderweb of connections, some green and healthy, some red and broken. The official internet was slowing down, clogged with panic and surveillance. They needed a new one. Lee Hannah called it the Ghost Net. The idea was simple. They would use pieces of the old system to make a hidden new one. She and the programmer, Day, wrote a simple program. It could turn any phone, any computer into a tiny relay point. It used bits of leftover bandwidth, hopping from device to device, never staying in one place long enough to be caught. It was not for watching videos. It was for sending short, vital messages. It was like whispering in a crowded, noisy room. But every whisper was connected. Jihan's job was to write the call. He sat at a terminal, Mina sleeping in a portable crib beside him. He thought about what to say to the world and to the conclave. He didn't write about military power or national pride. He started with simple things. He asked for photos of meals shared with neighbors during a blackout. He asked for recordings of street music from festivals. He asked for stories of how a stranger helped another stranger find their way. He asked scientists for the moment they solved a problem not for glory, but because they were curious. The request went out on the first threads of the ghost net. It was a small signal sent with hope. They did not know if anyone would listen. The reply did not come in words. Came in data, a flood of it. First, from a small town in Argentina, a video of firefighters rescuing a cat from a tree, taken by a laughing child. Then, from a library in Kenya, a scan of a handwritten note between students sharing answers, and a joke. From a traffic control center in Mumbai, a data stream showing how they manually untangled a gridlock during a power outage. Drivers cooperating without a working light. It was messy. It was emotional. It was brilliant. Hannah watched the files pour into her servers, her eyes wide. They understand, she whispered. They all understand. Sumin coordinated. A ham radio operator in Canada offered his tower. A retired engineer in Japan redirected a small private satellite. A group of university students in Berlin used their campus network as a backbone. The ghost net grew, not through orders but through agreement. It was the MERS maps all over again, but this time the disease was despair, and the cure was connection. In a corner, Choi Tae-suk worked on a different problem. The demonstration. The language of force. He had a list, a sad list. Decommissioned defense rockets in storage yards in Texas and Siberia. Obsolete training missiles in South Korean and French military depots. Weather rockets in Sweden. Old satellite launchers on a private space pad in New Zealand. They were all inert. Their warheads were removed long ago, or they never had any. They were just metal tubes with fuel inside. He could not access them. But he knew people who could. He started making calls on the secure line of the ghost net. He spoke to other retired officers, to active-duty soldiers who were sick of the paralysis, to technicians who cared for these old machines. He did not ask them to betray their countries. He asked them to be ready to follow a very unusual order, for the sake of their countries. The order would not be to kill. It would be to launch junk into a precise spot in orbit. A symbolic gesture. A show of hands. Many said no, but some enough said yes. A sergeant in Norway. A maintenance chief in Florida. A launch controller in Kazakhstan. They were scattered, but they were listening. Tae-suk gave them coordinates and a time. Not yet, but soon. Back at the main screen, Jihan and Hannah were putting humanity's case together. It was not a document. It was an experience. They wove the videos, the sounds, the data streams, the stories together. They showed the chaos, the riots, the arguments, the pollution. But right beside it, they showed the response. The people cleaning up, the inventors finding solutions, the communities rebuilding. They showed that the chaos and the cure came from the same place. The human heart, which could feel both terrible anger and incredible love. As the second night fell, the package was ready. A single, dense packet of light and meaning. They aimed it not at the Earth, but at the point in space where Eller's signal had originated. They sent it on every frequency they could access, piggybacking on official channels, bursting it out through the ghost net's hidden pathways. In the server room, they all watched the screen. Sent, it read. They waited. Minutes passed. Nothing. No reply. No change in the silent countdown. Tae-suk let out a long, slow breath. He had not expected one. He looked at Jihan. They are not listening to our words. Jihan felt the cold frustration again. They had poured their hearts into a bottle and thrown it into the cosmic ocean, and the ocean did not care. So, Ji-hun said, his voice tired but firm. We speak their language now, the simple one.
Tae-seok nodded.
He picked up his secure device. He looked at the list of names, the men and women around the globe who were waiting in the dark. He typed a single preparatory command. Stand by. The ghost net hummed around them, alive with the whispers of a world that did not want to be turned off. They had sent their letter. Now they would have to send their punctuation. A big, bright, harmless exclamation mark in the sky. The reply from the stars was not a message. It was an arrival. High above the planet, at the edge of Earth's orbit, space began to warp. It shimmered like a heat haze on a desert road. Then ships appeared. They were not giant, threatening warships. They were sleek and smooth, like stones from a river. They were a dull gray color that seemed to swallow light. They moved without sound or fire. They just were. There were dozens of them arranged in a perfect grid. The Conclave's pacification fleet. On Earth, the final hours of the countdown began. In the server room in Seoul, the small group watched on a screen fed by a hack telescope feed. The sight made the air feel heavy. They got our package, Lee Hanna said quietly. And they sent this instead. Park Soo-min studied the fleet's formation. They're not in an attack pattern. They're in a deployment pattern, like they're setting up for a procedure. Kim Ji-hun held Mina a little tighter. She was awake now, playing with a plastic toy on the floor. The sight of the silent ships made his hope feel foolish. They had sent art and music and stories of kindness to a force that operated with the calm of a surgeon. Of course, it was ignored. You don't show a surgeon a painting to stop an operation. Choi Tae-suk did not look at the ships for long. He looked at his watch, then at the list of contacts on his secure screen. His part of the plan was the most fragile. It relied on people he had never met in dozens of countries, all deciding to do something that made no military sense at the exact same time. They will begin soon, Tae-suk said, his voice gravelly. Their logic is set. Our words did not change it. Now we must speak with action. We must show them a new piece of data their logic does not expect. He looked at Ji-hun. The order. Ji-hun felt sick. This was the moment. Doing this could be seen as an act of war. Could make things worse. It could give the Conclave the exact proof they wanted, that humanity was violently unstable. He looked at his daughter. He thought of her future being a quiet, peaceful, colorless thing. A life without loud laughter or stupid risks or passionate anger. He nodded. Do it. Tae-suk's fingers moved over the keyboard. He did not send a complex code. He sent a time and a set of coordinates, followed by a simple phrase. For choice. The message flashed through the ghost net. It bounced from node to node, crossing borders invisibly. It arrived on screens in dark control rooms, on phones in bunkers, on tablets in lonely storage hangars in a desert in the United States. A retired sergeant major, his hands shaking slightly, input the coordinates into the guidance system of a decommissioned Thor missile that was now a museum display. Its warhead had been concrete for 40 years. On a windy plateau in Kazakhstan, a young technician, her heart pounding, overrode a safety lock on an old Soyuz booster engine used for training. It contained only enough fuel to lift it a few hundred kilometers. From a remote island in the Pacific, a weather agency team launched a standard atmospheric probe rocket, altering its flight path as instructed. From Sweden, from Brazil, from an old coastal defense site in South Korea, more followed. Dozens of launches, then hundreds. They were not weapons. They were relics, tools, and empty shells. Their only shared trait was that they could move, and they could follow a simple digital command. In the Seoul server room, they watched a global map on the big screen. Small red dots began to appear. One in Nevada, two in Russia, one in India. The dots multiplied. Each one represented a launch. A tiny, defiant spark. It's working, Soo-min breathed, tracing the streams of data. The ghost net is holding. They're all using our path for guidance. In space, the Conclave fleet detected the launches immediately. Their sensors categorized them. Primitive chemical rockets, low yield, varied origins. The fleet's tactical logic assessed the threat. It was minimal. The combined explosive power of all the projectiles would not even scratch the paint of one conclave ship. It was not an attack. It was nonsense. The fleet commander, a being of pure logic linked to the others, almost dismissed it. A final, erratic spasm from a doomed species. But then the second layer of data came in. The projectiles were not aimed at the fleet. They were all aimed at the same empty point in low Earth orbit, a point directly between the fleet and the planet. And they were launching in near-perfect synchrony from every continent. That was not chaos. That was coordination on a global scale. That was impossible according to their models of human societal fragmentation. The fleet halted its advance. The smooth, gray ships hung in space, motionless. They watched as the cloud of primitive human objects rose from the blue planet. It was a storm of useless metal. A silent, expanding cloud of junk. On Earth, people saw it too. In the night sky over the Americas, over Asia, over Europe, streaks of light curled upward. They were not the straight, angry lines of weapons. They were arcs, like hundreds of seeds being thrown into the sky at once. For a few minutes, the heavens were alive with silent, sparkling trails. In the server room, the silence was tense. They had done it. They had spoken. Now they waited for the reply. The reply came on all channels. The shimmering form of Eller appeared again, this time only on the main screen in Seoul. Its voice was still calm, but there was a new quality in it, a hint of processing, of reevaluation. "People of Earth," Eller said, "you have launched a coordinated ballistic event. Your intent is not clear. Your weapons are incapable of harm. Explain this action. Explain it before we complete our pacification." Eller was not talking to the governments. It was talking directly to the source of the disruption. It had found their signal. All eyes in the room turned to Park Soo-min. She was the planner, the coordinator. She took a deep breath, looked at Ji-hun, who gave her a firm nod, and then she stepped in front of the camera. She did not look like a general. She looked like a tired project manager, which she was. "It's simple," Soo-min said, her voice clear and steady. "You demanded our submission. You gave us a choice. Kneel or be made to kneel. This is our answer." She gestured to the screen behind her, still showing the map of launches. "We launched every weapon we had that would cause no harm. We did it together as one planet without your pacification fields. You call that chaos? We call that choice. You asked for our surrender. We sent you a demonstration of what we are. This is our nature, the good and the bad. It all comes from the same place. You cannot have one without the other." On the screen, Eller's shimmering form flickered, like a disturbed pond. It was silent. It was thinking. For the first time, it was truly looking at them. Eller's silence stretched out. In the server room, the only sounds were the hum of machines and Park Soo-min's own heartbeat in her ears. She could feel the eyes of her friends on her back.
Kim Vi-hun, holding Mina.
Choi Tae-suk, standing stiffly like a soldier at rest. Lee Hannah, her fingers frozen over a keyboard on the screen. The shimmering form of the emissary rippled. It was not a human expression, but it felt like confusion. The logic was broken. "Your statement is contradictory." Eller's voice finally returned, its serene tone now touched by a faint static. "You claim a unified action, yet your method was deception and unauthorized use of assets. You claim peaceful intent, yet you used the framework of warfare. This is the instability we must correct." Before Soo-min could answer, Lee Hannah leaned into the camera's view. Her face was sharp with a scholar's frustration. "You're not listening. You're just categorizing. Deception. Warfare. Those are your words for what happened. Our words are cooperation and statement. We used the tools we had to make a point you couldn't ignore. Just like during a crisis on our planet, people use the tools they have, words, maps, shared data, to find a solution when the big systems fail. That's not instability. That's adaptability." Eller processed this. Adaptability is a source of unpredictable variables. The Conclave's peace is built on predictable harmony. You want a quiet universe. Jihan said, stepping forward, his daughter on his hip. Mina looked at the pretty light on the screen with curiosity. But quiet isn't the same as peaceful. You can make a room quiet by removing everyone from it. Is that peace? You would make us quiet by removing the parts of us you don't like. You would leave a shell. A quiet, peaceful, dead shell. He pointed at the data stream still faintly glowing on a secondary monitor. The collection of photos, music, and stories from humanity's case. That noise you want to delete? That's the sound of us living. The art and the argument come from the same place. You can't have one without the other. The image of Eller flickered more violently. It was consulting with the fleet with the greater conclave mind. The pacification ships still hung in space, but they had not moved closer. Before them, the cloud of harmless human rockets and old debris was now spreading, forming a diffuse, glittering ring in the high atmosphere. A pointless, beautiful barrier. Your demonstration is a fascinating anomaly, Eller conceded. But an anomaly is a flaw in a system. The system must still be stabilized. The pacification will proceed, with adjustments to account for this cooperative defiance. The fields will be calibrated more gently. A cold dread filled the room. They had done all this, and it was just a footnote. A small adjustment in the manual.it was Choi Tae-suk who spoke next. He had been silent, studying the emissary. He saw not a god, but a commander. A commander who only understood one kind of order. You still don't understand the demonstration, Tae-suk said, his old soldier's voice cutting through the digital silence. It wasn't just the launch. It was the cost. Eller's light pulsed. Explain. We spent our currency, Tae-suk said slowly, clearly. Every one of those rockets was something. A museum piece, a training tool, a scientific instrument. We spent our history, our education, and our knowledge of our own planet. We spent treasures to send you a message that says no. Not to hurt you, to be heard. A violent species would have saved those assets, or used them to attack. A suicidal species would have used real weapons. What does that make a species that spends its treasures on a shout? He let the question hang in the air. You study us. What is your analysis of that action? What is the predictive model for a civilization that willingly makes itself poorer, weaker in your eyes, just to declare it wants to stay itself? For the first time, Eller's voice did not have an immediate answer. The flickering became a steady, rhythmic pulse. The fleet's perfect formation shifted slightly, one ship adjusting its angle on the data screen behind them. Hannah saw it. A new analysis was being run. The conclave was reprocessing everything. Not just the missile launch, but the ghost net that enabled it. The humanities case package they had ignored. They were connecting the dots, just as people had done during the outbreak years ago. You are operating on a paradox, Eller stated, and the new tone was not of judgment, but of dawning realization. Individual will leading to collective action. Collective action to preserve individual will. It is recursive. It is inefficient. It's alive, Jihan said softly, looking at Mina, who was now babbling at the screen. Life is inefficient. Life is messy. You want to make us orderly. That means making us less alive. Is that in your rules? To protect a species by killing what it is. The rhythmic pulse of Eller's form became a solid, steady light. The connection seemed to widen, as if more of the conclave's attention was now focused directly on this small, crowded room on the rebellious planet. The prime directive of the conclave is the preservation of complex life in its thriving state, Eller announced, as if reciting a law. Pacification is a tool for that preservation. Your data stream, your case, suggests your thriving state is dependent on the variables we classify as risks. Sumin seized the opening. Yes, you cannot separate them. If you pacify us, you won't preserve us. You'll create something else. A prisoner. Would that satisfy your directive? The silence this time was different. It was not the silence of dismissal. It was the silence of a profound calculation, one that was failing to produce a clear answer. Eller's form began to soften, its light withdrawing from their screen. The anomaly must be studied. The fleet will hold position. Do not launch more objects. The connection severed. The screen went dark. For a long moment, no one in the server room moved or spoke. They were breathing hard, as if they had just run a long race. What does that mean? Day, the young programmer, asked. Tae-suk let out a long, slow breath. It means we confused them. We didn't beat them. We puzzled them. We introduced a problem their logic can't solve. Ji-hun looked from the dark screen to the window, where the first hints of dawn were touching the sky. The countdown clock in his mind had not stopped, but it had paused. They had bought time with a storm of junk and a simple, unbearable truth. They had not won, but they had not lost. For now, in the quiet hum of the room, with his daughter warm in his arms, that was enough. The world held its breath. The official countdown reached 0, and nothing happened. The silent, gray fleet hung in space, a new constellation that did not move. On Earth, the panic began to change. The shock of the ultimatum turned into a nervous, global waiting. What came next? In the Seoul server room, the waiting was filled with work. The ghost net was now a living thing. Messages poured in from everywhere. People sent thanks. They sent questions. They sent more data for humanity's case, as if the story needed to be constantly written. Park Soo-min and Lee Hannah managed the flow, their exhaustion pushed aside by a steady hum of purpose. Kim Ji-hun tried to rest, but sleep would not come. He sat with Mina, watching the normal morning light through the window, felt fragile like painted glass. The pause was not peace. It was the moment between a question and an answer. Choi Tae-suk watched the telescope feeds. The conclave ships were not idle. Small, shimmering probes like pieces of Eller, detached from the larger vessels. They flew slowly through the cloud of human debris, the spent rockets and old shells. They scanned the objects, not with weapons, but with curious, gentle lights. They were studying the cost, as Tae-suk had called it. They are cataloging the museum pieces, he said to the room. They are trying to understand the price we paid. 2 days passed. The governments of the world, confused and sidelined, made cautious statements about ongoing diplomatic assessments. But everyone knew the diplomacy was happening in a converted server farm in Seoul. On the morning of the 3rd day, the signal came. It was not a broadcast. It was a direct, pinpoint request for a secure channel to the Seoul node. Eller was calling them back. They gathered around the main screen. Ji-hun held Mina, who was fussy with a tooth coming in. Soo-min straightened her shirt. Hannah took a deep breath. Tae-suk stood at attention. His face a stone mask. Eller's form appeared. It was calmer now, its light a steady silver blue. We have analyzed the anomaly. Eller began without greeting. The data packet humanity's case. The method of the ghost net. The coordinated launch of non-viable ballistic objects. We have reached a conclusion. The room was so quiet they could hear the computers breathing. Your species operates on a principle the conclave has no record of. You call it choice. We have observed that your choice leads to both great creation and great destruction. They are two outputs of the same system. To remove one is to damage the system beyond its function. Eller paused, its light pulsing softly. The conclave's prime directive is to preserve complex life in a thriving state. For all other species we have encountered, thriving is a state of balance and harmony. For humanity, your data suggests thriving is a state of dynamic tension. It is unstable. It is illogical, but it appears to be fundamental. Ji-hun's heart began to beat faster. He rocked Mina gently. Therefore, Eller continued, standard pacification protocols cannot be applied. They would preserve a body but extinguish the spark. This violates the directive. Soo-min dared to speak. So you will leave? No, Eller said, and for a second dread returned. You are a risk. Your dynamic tension could spill into the galaxy. A single human war, fought with future technology, could disrupt 1,000 peaceful worlds. You cannot be left unsupervised. The hope that had begun to bloom shriveled. They were back to the same problem, just with different words. What is your solution? Hannah asked, her voice tight. A new designation, Eller stated. You will be registered as a volitional protectorate. The conclave will place a monitoring station in your outer solar system. It will ensure no external threats come to you, and more importantly, that your dynamic tension does not expand beyond your own space. You will be quarantined, but you will not be pacified. It took a moment for the meaning to sink in. You're putting us in a playpen? Taesuk asked, his brow furrowed. You are being given the space to be what you are, Eller corrected. Without harming others. You will govern yourselves. You will fight your wars, create your art, and make your choices. You will live with your consequences. The conclave will only intervene if your actions threaten to breach the boundaries we set. It is the only logical solution that satisfies our directive. It was not freedom. It was a bigger cage. But it was a cage with their own rules inside. They would not be controlled. They would be contained. Jihan looked at his friends. He saw the same calculation in their eyes. It was not a victory parade. It was a compromise written in starlight. They had forced a galaxy-spanning authority to admit it was wrong, to create a whole new category just for humanity. They had saved their right to be messy, to be loud, to be themselves. We need to discuss this with, Sumin started to say, meaning the world's leaders. You are the authors of the anomaly, Eller interrupted. You speak for the will that defied us. Do you accept this status? They all looked at each other. It was a terrible, immense responsibility. They were just people who had been frustrated and scared. But they had acted. Jihan thought of the alternative, the gentle, horrible silence of the pacification fields. He thought of Mina growing up in that quiet world. He nodded. Sumin nodded. Hannah and Taesuk nodded. We accept, Sumin said for them all. Then it is done, Eller said. The great fleet began to move, not down toward Earth, but outward, away. All but one small ship, which shot toward the orbit of Jupiter to begin building the monitoring station. Eller's form began to fade from their screen. But before it vanished completely, it added one last thing, its voice carrying a trace of something almost like respect. Continue your dynamic tension, humanity. It is interesting to observe. The screen went dark. The connection was gone. For a long time, no one spoke. The tension that had held them up for days seemed to drain away, leaving them empty and heavy. Jihan looked down. Mina had finally fallen asleep, her cheek against his chest, her breathing deep and calm. Outside, the Tuesday sun was shining on a city that was still free to be loud and messy and alive. They had not won a war. They had simply refused to disappear. And the universe, for all its power and logic, had decided to let them be. The news spread across the world, not as an official announcement, but as a ripple through the ghost net first. The conclave fleet was leaving. The pacification was cancelled. A strange, new status was in place. People poured into the streets, not to riot, but to stand together under the open sky. They cried. They hugged strangers. They laughed with a raw, relieved sound that was the opposite of quiet. The noise was beautiful. In the server room, the quiet was deep. The work was done. Park Sumin slowly powered down non-essential systems. Lee Hannah saved the final logs of humanity's case, archiving the proof of what they were. Choi Taesuk stood by the window, watching the first normal traffic jam begin to form on the street below. Life was returning to its messy, ordinary state. Kim Ji-hun sat on a chair, Mina asleep in his arms. He felt numb. The immense pressure that had been sitting on his chest for days was gone, but it left a hollow feeling. He kept waiting for something else to happen. For Eller to return and say it was a mistake. Sumin brought him a cup of water. It's over, Ji-hun, she said softly. Is it? He asked, looking at his daughter's face. We're in a cage now. A big one, but a cage. We were always in a cage, Taesuk said from the window, not turning around. The cage of gravity. The cage of our lifespan. The cage of this solar system. They just put a fence around the yard and called it a rule. We still have the house. We still have each other inside it. Hannah nodded, closing her laptop with a gentle click. They didn't give us what we wanted. They gave us what we are. Problem to be managed, not solved. It's honest. And it means we get to keep being the problem. We get to keep trying to solve ourselves. A week later, life had not returned to normal because normal was gone. A new normal was being built. The world's governments, embarrassed and grateful, tried to take credit. They spoke of diplomatic triumphs. But everyone knew. The story of the soul server room, of the ghost net and the useless missiles was already becoming a legend. The governments, wisely, did not try to interfere with the legend. One evening, Ji-hun went back to the server room. It was almost empty now. Most of the equipment was gone, returned, or repurposed. He had come to collect a few of Mina's toys left in the corner, but he was not alone. Sumin, Hannah, and Tae-suk were there too. They had all, without planning it, come back for one last look. They stood together in the empty, humming space. The main screen was dark. "What do we do now?" Hannah asked. The question wasn't about jobs. It was about everything. "We live," Tae-suk said. "We live with the fence. We build taller ladders. We plant gardens. We argue about the fence. We show our children both the fence and the sky." Sumin smiled a little. "The ghost net protocols, we should keep them. Not active, but saved. In case of another outbreak. In case the fence ever feels too small." They all agreed. It would be their secret. A set of tools for the next time the people needed to speak when the systems wouldn't listen. Ji-hun picked up Mina's stuffed rabbit from the floor. He looked at his friends. The engineer, the data analyst, the logistics expert, the soldier. They were not heroes. They were not leaders. They were just people who had been pushed, and instead of falling over, they had pushed back by linking arms. "We didn't win because we were strong," Ji-hun said quietly. "We won because we were connected. And we were connected because we remembered how to be. That's all." A year passed. On a Tuesday morning, under a pale blue sky, Ji-hun walked his daughter to her preschool. Mina was chattering loudly about a butterfly she had seen. Her voice was bright and full of questions. It was not a peaceful sound. It was a vibrant, demanding, chaotic sound. As they walked, Ji-hun looked up. He couldn't see the monitoring station near Jupiter. He couldn't see the fence. But he knew it was there. It didn't feel like a prison wall. Felt like a line. A line that said, "This is where you are. Be what you are. But be it here." He kissed Mina goodbye at the school gate. She ran inside to her friends, her small voice joining the wonderful, noisy chorus of other children. Ji-hun turned and walked back into the city. The traffic was loud. A street vendor argued with a customer over a price. Two old men played a loud, competitive game of chess in the park. A young couple laughed, their heads close together. It was also beautifully, perfectly noisy. It was dynamic tension. It was life, unchained if not wholly free. They had not defeated the conclave. They had simply presented a bill for their own soul, a bill for the right to be flawed and glorious and difficult. And the universe, after careful review, had looked at the receipt, sighed a sigh of logical resignation, and paid it. He reached his apartment and paused at the door. Inside was quiet, for now. Soon, Mina would return and fill it with sound again. He smiled, opened the door, and stepped inside, leaving the brilliant, chaotic, chosen noise of the world behind him, ready to welcome it back home again soon.